Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. I think we are live. I thought, why not? Why not go live and see if we can usher in 60% Bitcoin dominance? It's been a milestone for a long time that we've been talking about. So let me see if I can pull it up here. Had the other video up. All right, let me see if I can actually present my screen so that you guys can see it. So right now, Bitcoin dominance is at 59.86%, 59.85. I see the comments. Everyone keeps saying, it'd be a cruel joke if it tops out at 59.99. But the reality, right? The reality right now, and I have said this many, many times, right? And I don't say it lightly. I mean, I don't make many predictions, right? If we're honest with ourselves, I don't really give that many concrete predictions. But I would say it's more likely for Bitcoin dominance to overshoot 60 than to not make it there, right? It's more likely that it would overshoot than not actually make it to the 60% milestone. And the reason why I say that is because, and I mean, look, guys, it doesn't have to be today, right? Although I certainly hope it is. But the reason why I say that is if you were to look at all Bitcoin pairs, for example, they're at 0.36, right? And the range low is 0.25. Now listen, it is possible that they're lower than this makes it seem because I'm not showing USDC dominance or USDC market cap on this chart. So if you go over here and you add in or you subtract out the USDC as well, then you get a chart that looks like this, where instead of 0.36, alt Bitcoin pairs are already at 0.34, right? Now, if that's the case, there still is room for them to drop, right? Just to get to the range low of 0.25. But because there's still this big gap here, that's the reason why I still remain very bullish on Bitcoin dominance. And I think it's more likely to overshoot 60 than to not make it there, if that makes sense. Now, again, it's hard to know where the exact top for Bitcoin dominance is going to be. 60% was always a rough estimate. It's possible that dominance doesn't make it there, but I do think it will. Um, and I think it will make it there relatively soon. The reason why dominance will likely go down in 2025 is because once looser monetary policy arrives, right? Once looser monetary policy arrives, then the higher risk stuff starts to outperform the lower risk stuff, regardless of the direction of Bitcoin USD. So it's the exact opposite of what I've been saying for the last 3 years, right? So since the beginning of 2022, what I have said is Bitcoin dominance should go up no matter the direction of Bitcoin USD. And what that essentially meant is first Bitcoin went down and then Bitcoin went up. In 2025, the reverse will likely be true, and then it'll be Bitcoin dominance will likely go down in 2025, regardless of the direction of Bitcoin USD. And that's an important thing to think about, right? And listen, guys, it has nothing to do with being a Bitcoin maxi or not being a Bitcoin maxi. The reality is, the longer you're in crypto, you're gonna find yourself more so gravitating at least to the higher market cap coins. Um, and whether that ends up being Bitcoin and ETH, maybe Bitcoin, ETH, and a few of the higher market cap alts is going to be on your own risk tolerance, right? That's going to depend on your own risk tolerance. But I'm just saying, in general, the more cycles you're here, the more you recognize that a lot of this stuff just keeps bleeding back to Bitcoin over a long enough period of time. One of the really interesting things, by the way, that I was pointing out on Twitter yesterday. And again, this is a somewhat controversial view because so many people are certainly knee deep in the meme coin market. But if you were to look at others Bitcoin, right? Others divided by Bitcoin. So basically everything outside of the top 10 divided by Bitcoin, at least as far as TradingView tracks them by market cap. Others just put in a new low against Bitcoin today, right? Today. Now, what are the ramifications of that? Like, what does that actually mean, for them to put in a new low today? What it means, I'm just pulling up dominance just in case we see it start to move. Right now, it's still below 60. But the importance of that, right? The importance of others Bitcoin going to a new low this much later shows you that every single move by low market cap altcoins against Bitcoin since 2022 began, every one of them was a bear market rally that eventually led to lower highs and ultimately new lows for the cycle, right? Now, again, the reason it's a controversial view is because there's a lot of people out there that are obviously shilling these low market cap altcoins on a daily basis. More than likely, they are paid to do so. If they're not paid to do so, more than likely, they are likely getting allocations into the projects. Maybe they're creating them themselves, or someone's just gifting it to them so that they are incentivized to talk about it. The reason I know this stuff is because the same people reach out to me to talk about low market cap altcoins, and I say no, right? It's not that hard. Some of these other people should start practicing saying no to shilling this stuff. My point is that it's not a popular view to be bullish on Bitcoin dominance for 3 years, right? I mean, think about how many enemies I've made along the way. The point is, I'm not here to tell you what you want to hear. I'm trying to tell you what you need to hear. And over the last 3 years, the obvious path was dominance of Bitcoin was going to go to 60%. Come hell or high water, right? It was going to happen. The only thing that the only thing that I think ended was people's patience to watch it play out, right? Thinking about like others Bitcoin. Think about how many times someone has told you, or at least they told me on Twitter, um, you know, why dominance would not go to 60, right? Because others Bitcoin was on this crazy rally and, there's no way the dominance could go up. And again, a new low again. But the reality is that the monetary policy view always predicted this was going to happen. This is because this is exactly what happened last cycle. The exact same thing, right? And if you don't believe me, good. Question it because I can prove it, right? I can prove it. Last cycle, others Bitcoin dropped 60%, rallied 60% into the Fed pause, which is this blue line sort of leveling out up here. That's where the Fed pause interest rates. And then they dropped another 60%, right? You see that? Down 60, up 60, down 60 as rate cuts arrive. The same thing is happening this cycle, right? Others Bitcoin down 60, up 60 into the pause, right? Even 70. And then now it's already down 44%. So arguably, others Bitcoin, if it were to fall 60%, could put it at around 0.11. I don't know if it's going to go that low. After Bitcoin dominance hits 60%, it probably makes sense to start to become a little bit more neutral on this stuff and not be as bearish on alt Bitcoin pairs collectively. But this is the same thing that happened last cycle. You can even look at sort of these lows last cycle by others Bitcoin and see how they tagged this trend line, right? And it was the third tag of it that finally marked the bottom after rate cuts arrived. You can see something very similar happening again, right? There was a tag here, and potentially if it were to drop down to 0.11, 0.11, that's not really that much further away. I mean, it sounds crazy, right? I mean, it sounds crazy to a lot of people to have ever suggested that they could go as low as 0.11. And I don't know if they're going to go that low. I really don't. Because Bitcoin dominance is nearing 60%. At that point, I will drop the bias. Okay. In fact, I mean, you could argue that it's worth dropping now with dominance near 60. But the point is, you should always be open to all outcomes. And the reality is that there is a non-negligible chance that others Bitcoin does drop down to this trend line down here. And it makes sense, guys. At the end of the day, in 10 years, Bitcoin will likely still be here. The random meme coins being shilled to you on a daily basis by a lot of people, they probably won't be. And that's the reason why during these tightening cycles and quantitative tightening, that stuff just bleeds back to Bitcoin, right? Because it doesn't actually provide value, providing laughs and stuff for the communities That's not real value that can be looked at over a long period of time. Sure, it can be a short-term narrative, but it's not the real value that you need. And that's the issue, is that a lot of people, they sort of talk about these alts, um, and why they'll outperform Bitcoin, but before you know it, a lot of these alts are down so much. So listen, guys, at the end of the day, if you faded the Bitcoin dominance rally, don't feel too bad about it, okay? Because I did it my first cycle too. I did it my first cycle too. If you're asking me now if you should convert your alts to Bitcoin, um, look, over a multi-year time horizon, right, over the next 10 years, there's probably never too late of a time to convert altcoins to Bitcoin, if we're being honest. But in the short term, you should know that my base case at this point in time is that Bitcoin dominance will go down in 2025, right? Which is only 2 months from now, right? That's only about 2 months from the current time. So it's hard, right, to say exactly what's going to happen between now and then. 2 months is still a long way to go. But if you think about it, right, if you were to look at like alt Bitcoin pairs, for example, total 3 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin, once the move began to the range lows, right, once it really started going, it just took a couple of months, right? You had two big red monthly candles here, July and August of 2019, and then the final low was put in September. So if altcoins do capitulate against Bitcoin, they could get down here relatively quickly. It wouldn't take a whole lot. The only real question is, does it happen on a Bitcoin rally, or does it happen on a Bitcoin dump? Right? That's the question that I think it makes sense to sort of think about. And honestly, I don't have as strong an opinion on that as I did on Bitcoin dominance. But the reason is because I do think it's actually really difficult to predict USD valuations of cryptocurrencies. I think a lot of people pretend like they can do it, but if you scrutinize a lot of their posts over the last year, I think you'll find many of them have been wrong. And I don't think I would be any better at predicting USD valuation of Bitcoin. So what I said, right, basically since 2022 began, is that you're probably going to be better off with Bitcoin until Bitcoin dominance hits 60%, right? That's what I said. Um, did I imagine it would take this long? No, I did not. Um, this is not at all like the journey that I thought it would be. It took a lot longer for Bitcoin dominance to get to these levels than I thought it would, right? I would have assumed it would have happened a year ago, right? Because that's when it happened in 2019, right? In 2019, dominance hit the level, that would have corresponded to the same thing as this cycle, right? It hit it in September of 2019, right? But what's really interesting about that, and the reason why it makes sense to start looking for a top on dominance relatively soon, is because last cycle, Bitcoin dominance topped after 2 months after the first rate cut, right? 2 months. So the first rate cut was in July. Bitcoin dominance topped in September. This time, the first rate cut was in September. And so it makes sense to start being on the lookout for that final surge by Bitcoin dominance that, of course, could happen at any moment, right? No one knows exactly when it's going to happen. I can tell you that if Bitcoin keeps chopping around like this, it's not going to take very long for it to reach that level. Remember, going into the last rate cut, we saw Bitcoin dominance basically go up into the last rate cut, okay, on September 18th. And then that marked a local top before it came back down. There's really two parts of the cycle that you have to be familiar with regards to Bitcoin dominance. There's the top that occurs right after rate cuts and when QE begins. If you overlay total assets held by the Federal Reserve, you can see what I'm talking about, right? There's this top by dominance when QE begins. You see that? When QE begins, when quantitative easing begins, Bitcoin dominance then puts in a top. That's what happened last cycle, right? And when Bitcoin dominance put in that top, it happened to correspond to the 0.618 fib retracement. Okay. So there was another top though that occurred later on, but that was after QE, right? That was after QE returned. And that could be a future Bitcoin dominance rally as well. But there's also likely a transitionary period. There was a transitionary period between that top there when QE began and this top here by dominance, which was, a year into QE, or maybe not quite a year, but, well, no, I guess it was a little over a year, in fact. Um, so something like that could happen, right? It's possible that something like that could happen again, where you get, some top by dominance between now and December. And guys, I don't know when the top's going to be exactly, right? I just think around 60% plus or minus, right? I don't know exactly. Get off my back. I'm not going to be able to tell you the exact day that it tops. Maybe it's today, right? I don't know. But there's likely whenever it does top, right? Whenever it does top, there will likely be sort of this bleed back to the bull market support band. Um, and then there's a chance that dominance could then go back up later on, right? Later on. It could be a year from now or something. But in the short term, right? In the short term, I do think that dominance will likely go down in 2025. Okay. It's going to be really difficult to predict exactly what it's going to do between now and then. Right. I mean, right now it's at 59.8%. Um, the high for it is what, like 59.83. I think it went a little higher than that. 59.84, something like that. It depends on, I mean, the trading view doesn't really show it as well as, okay, it looks like it went to 59.87. So 59.87 so far. Really not that far away from 60%, but this has been a long journey, guys. And um, I said a long time ago, Bitcoin heavy until 60%. I think it's worked out. Definitely some periods along the way where it certainly seemed like it wasn't going to. But you can see that a lot of these altcoins have just bled back to Bitcoin over the last several years. Um, there's some that are holding up better than others, but most of them have been doing pretty poorly for a while. ETH Bitcoin is now at 0.036. Remember, I said that if 038 does not hold, then you should get a fairly quick move to 0.036. And that's what we got, right? 0.03 did not hold. It went right through 0.037 down to 0.036. I would say, with regards to something like ETH Bitcoin, if you're trying to figure out, where the bottom is, I would say that if and when ETH Bitcoin crosses its 50-day moving average, I would guess that the low is the probability of the low being in is at least 50%, right? Once ETH Bitcoin crosses its 50-day moving average. I don't know exactly when that's going to be, but if that happens, that would likely correspond to the low being in. Um, if you actually look at Bitcoin dominance plus USDT dominance, what you may notice is that it actually crossed through this really important milestone. We've been talking about this for a long time, sort of breaking through 63, 64%. You can see it's now at 65%, which is also what happened in 2019, right around the rate cut. So in 2019, it occurred before rate cuts. I think the reason it doesn't line up perfectly is because we could add in more of the coins to really show you what I'm talking about. So if you add in USDC dominance to this, right, then you go from here, you go all the way up here, you can see that corresponded to only a week or so before rate cuts. But what's really interesting, and what I look at the most, one of the things I look at the most is this chart. This is Bitcoin dominance plus ETH dominance plus USDT dominance plus USDC dominance. And this one has been instrumental in helping me to stay steadfast on the idea that dominance would go to 60%, because I saw what happened by this metric in 2019 and 2020. It basically kept tagging this high up here. and it's been doing the same thing this cycle in 2023 and 2024, right? So this high occurred before the actual parabolic blow off top by dominance, by the blue chip dominance, if you call it that, or risk flight to safety dominance. The actual top before the blow off was in November of 2020. So it was November of the halving year, right? It was November of the halving year. And we are going into November of the halving year this time. And so, and you can already see that this metric is starting to turn up here, right? You can see that right here, it was going up. And so I do wonder, it seems like there's a decent chance that this metric rallies into November or December, and that might be the top, right? Now there is a chance that you get something like this where it goes well above, even my expectations. But if that happens, you would likely get a pretty sharp reversal in 2025, which is interesting because that's exactly when you got the sharp reversal in 2021. The post-halving year, right? The post-election year. And I think the reason is because of looser monetary policy, right? Which we're starting to get looser monetary policy again. So right now, dominance is at 59.82%. Is it going to go to 60% during the live stream? I don't really know. If I were you, what I would say is start thinking now about how market dynamics could start to change between now and early 2025, because they likely will, right? And whether you're a Bitcoin maxi, whether you're full on crypto degen, it's important to respect the cycles, right? Respect the cycles. It's not personal. There's a reality that Bitcoin dominance spends 3 years going up and then only 1 year going down. And this has basically been one of the main, theses of this channel is, right, like, don't fade the Bitcoin dominance rally, right? Let it do its thing and get back to 60%. Now, some people are calling for much higher. You'll see people say it's going to go to 100% or 90% or 80 or 70 or 65. Look, anything's possible. Anything's possible. My target has always been 60, right? That's been my target. I could see a scenario where it overshoots 60 if all Bitcoin pairs just continue collapsing to the lows, right? Like if they just keep on collapsing to the lows. The only way that Bitcoin dominance doesn't overshoot 60 is if ETH Bitcoin bounces, because ETH Bitcoin, I think, is already, it's already done what I thought it was going to do, go to 0.03 to 0.04. I don't know how deep into the range it goes, but it's already at the point where it would be reasonable for it to, start to turn around sometime soon, right? Again, I don't know the day that it's going to happen, and it might not be for another month or two, for all I know. But this is likely, this is the pattern, right? Dominance is up for 1, down for 3. Up for 1, down for 3. So now right now and listen, again, it's okay if you faded it, because again, as I said, I faded it my first cycle. I'm no better just because I lived through it. It's only because I lived through it, and you lived through it now too. So now in the future, you'll probably be right there with me in terms of that view of like, it's not personal, and some alts will outperform, and it's part of the game, right? I'm not here to sort of dunk on the people that made money trading the altcoins that did outperform. The point is that most people don't make money trading those; they lose money. And yes, there are some that did outperform, but most of them just simply bled back to Bitcoin over a long enough period of time. Okay, so the question, right, that obviously is what people want to know is what happens at 60%, right? I think, and I'm just trying to be honest with you guys, right? I think the appropriate course of action in this situation is to see if Bitcoin can actually take out these highs, right? And not keep assuming that it will, right? Yes, a lot of people think it will. And I would say there's a decent chance it could. After the 2019 consolidation period, it took about 7 months to break through the lower high structure, and we're about there now, right? Like, it seems like it could happen. Um, and you'll see people draw these trend lines all sorts of different ways, right? One way to draw it is to sort of connect the majority of the wicks, or sorry, of the sort of the candle bodies, and just say, if you look at it from like that perspective, it looks like it's just retesting the breakout point. The more conservative way to view it is just to connect the highest wicks and say, get above that, and then we'll talk, right? Durably get above that, and then we'll talk. And sort of show that we're not just repeating the same pattern over and over and over again, right? Where Bitcoin rallies up, pulls back, and then one more rally, and then down, right? Rallies up, pulls back, one more rally, and then down, rally up, pull back, one more rally. So let's show that that's not what's going to happen. Okay. Now, the reason I say that is because there's very clearly two main views for Bitcoin from now through the end of the year. And take it from me, guys, they both have merit. If you trust my opinion on the market, which, it's got a track record of doing really, really well sometimes, and then being on the complete wrong side of the market at other times, right? Absolutely. I've made plenty of mistakes. But what I'm looking at is this. I see two valid ways to look at the market. And I told people in ITC Premium this like 6 months ago, that both views can be valid through October. But by the time we get to November, there has to be a decision, right? They can't both continue to be correct. There is one way I could imagine where they both could continue to be correct, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But in order for them to both be right by October, I said Bitcoin could still hit 70K by October, and both views still be correct. Why do I say that? Well, when you look at year-to-date ROI, by the way, this is year-to-date ROI of ETH Bitcoin. This is 2024 compared to 2019. So don't tell me this is the halving year and that it can't do what it did in 2019 because it's the halving year. It's doing the same damn thing. If you look at Bitcoin in 2024 and 2020 and 2016 and 2012, and let's take an average, right? Let's take an average 2012, 2016, and 2020. And then let's remove everything but the average and 2024. You'll see that normally, on average, Bitcoin goes up in Q4 of the halving year, right? Like, that is a fact, right? That's a fact. That's what it normally does. Furthermore, if you were to look at the ROI of Bitcoin from the low, normally this is the point in the cycle where it gets pushed higher. Normally. So to fade that view would be to fade seasonality and just the cycle ROI, right? But that doesn't mean it's wrong, right? There's still a chance that Bitcoin doesn't follow that view. At all times in the market, you should consider both outcomes, right? Because if you get zoned in on one outcome, then you can lose your way. Now, it's true, I got zoned in on ETH Bitcoin dropping to 0.03 to 0.04, Bitcoin dominance to 60%. And at times, I don't really know why I put myself in that position to not be a little bit more flexible with that view. But I look back today at the end of 2024 and I say, no, it was right? Like, my convictions were right. It made sense to sort of double down on those views, because I would argue at this point, like, look, the proof is there, right? I mean, Bitcoin dominance never really stopped going up. So I just want to put the other view out there again, just in case that happens, because I think there is a non-negligible chance, right? A non-negligible chance that something happens with the yield curve between now and the end of the year that throws us off course temporarily. And what is that? What am I talking about? Well, I mentioned this in the video yesterday that I put out, but the monetary policy view, is still not yet completely disproven, right? The monetary policy view is not completely disproven. And basically what happened last cycle is after the first rate cut right here, Bitcoin rallied to the lower high structure and then a couple months later found itself at the 100-week moving average. So if that happens, right, if that's just what's happening now and Bitcoin gets another sell-off to the 100-week moving average by the end of the year, I think it would be tempting for people to throw in the towel and say, that's it, right? But there is a chance that it would get a strong rally off of that, right? There's a chance. If it can't break out here. This is a if then statement, right? If it can't break through here, which the cyclical view says that it will, right? The cyclical view says that this is the time, right? Stop, making this more complicated than it needs to be and just defer to the 4-year cycle, right? The cyclical view says that this is when Bitcoin would break out. The monetary policy view would say, hold my beer, right? Like not necessarily. It depends. It depends. And you can see that after that lower high in 2019, Bitcoin then sold off to this again to the 100-week moving average. So that is the concern. Now, I want to talk about what that would look like, right? Because again, this is an if-then statement. I've said Bitcoin heavy till 60% for the last 3 years, right? So get off my back about, calling for anything like that. I've said Bitcoin heavy for the last 3 years. In early 2022, I converted my alts to Bitcoin. In mid 2022, I converted my ETH to Bitcoin at around 0.075. In late 2022, I bought Bitcoin with US dollars and I only sold a little bit during this rally over here because we got into some of the higher risk levels, right? So get off my back, right? I want to see Bitcoin succeed. But you gotta understand the downside risk at all times, even if it doesn't pan out, right? It doesn't mean it's not worth at least considering. And the only reason I bring it up is because of when Bitcoin dominance tops could actually be very instrumental in whether Bitcoin just breaks out here or if it sells off one more time. And I'll try to explain what I mean. Okay. If Bitcoin dominance tops now, right? Like now, like let's say it goes to 60% and, the viewers to this channel are on cloud 9 and then all of a sudden it starts dropping. Does that mean immediately that the altcoin market has to go up? A lot of people on the channel, they'll watch the videos and they'll say, well, if Bitcoin dominance tops, that means it's alt season, right? How many times have you heard someone say that, right? Like, oh, Bitcoin dominance tops, that means alt season immediate. In 2016, yes, that would have been the right view. And it could be the right view this time. So I don't really necessarily want to fade those views because I saw that happen in 2016. ETH Bitcoin capitulated in Q4 2016, along with the other alts at the time. Litecoin, Bitcoin capitulated, XRP capitulated against Bitcoin. Everything was capitulating against Bitcoin in Q4 of 2016. And then when Bitcoin dominance topped, alt season began. That was 2016. But dominance did not top until December, right? It did not top until December. And once you get into the new year, generally that favors the altcoin market over Bitcoin because normally Q4 is Bitcoin seasonality. Q4 is favorable Bitcoin seasonality. By the way, if you go look at Bitcoin dominance without stable coins, right? Let's go look at this really quick. If you look at Bitcoin dominance without stables, what you'll notice is that it's getting a big move up here. I'm not really sure if this is how accurate that. I wonder if we need to get this fixed, but it is moving up. If you look at 2020 and 2016, you can see the dominance faded into Q3 and then went up in Q4. But they've all been going up in Q4. The main difference between 2024 and 2016 and 2020 is that 2024 dominance went up all year, whereas in 2016 and 2020 it went down into Q3 and then up in Q4. But normally dominance goes up in Q4, especially of the halving year. And that's what we've been seeing so far this year, right? Now look at 2021 and 2017 Bitcoin dominance. It's a completely different trend. I don't even know if we have, 2013, there wasn't really enough data. There wasn't really enough altcoins, but you can even see that then it started to go down, right? So the point is to say, look, 2025, the most likely outcome, whether you like it or not, right? Whether you're a Bitcoin maxi or not, the most likely outcome for dominance is to go down in 2025. That's my thought. That's what I think. Okay. I could be wrong, but that's what I think right now with the information that I have. Now, is there a possibility that I'm wrong? It's possible. For instance, if the Fed stops cutting rates for whatever reason, if they decide not to end quantitative tightening, there's reasons that it could continue to go up into 2025. But my instinct on this says that dominance is going to top either this quarter or the second half of the second week of January at the absolute latest. But I don't really I think this quarter is the most likely answer. Second week of January, absolute latest. I think it could top, but I really think it'll top before then. And I do think dominance will go down in 2025. And so here's the caveat, right? For the people that are curious about, alt season, is if dominance tops now, right, in say like October or November, then you might not get your alt season that you're looking for immediately, right? And there's also a chance that alt season just never occurs, right? I mean, recessions do happen. I've said many, many times that until initial claims are at 300K or higher, there's no recession, right? Until initial claims are at 300K or higher, and they're not there yet. So until that happens, the cycle goes on like it normally does, right? It just simply goes on like it normally does. But I would say this. If Bitcoin breaks out here, and says to hell with the monetary policy view, it's cyclical time, right? It's cyclical view all the way in Q4 of the halving year, right? If it breaks out here, a lot of alts are going to then get into their final Bitcoin capitulation, right? They'll capitulate to the low against Bitcoin, is my guess, if Bitcoin breaks out. When Bitcoin broke out in 2023, you see that candle right there? That's what marked a local top for Bitcoin dominance for a long time, right? Look at that. See that breakout right there? Bitcoin dominance basically stayed below that level through March of the following year. You're talking about half a year. So if Bitcoin breaks through this and follows the cyclical view, then alt Bitcoin pairs would likely crash. In the short term, as Bitcoin dominance surges to 60% or higher, something like that, right? And then maybe it would cool off and then start to go down in 2025 if Bitcoin USD breaks through. Option one, right? Option two, and the reason I'm presenting this option, it's not because I want you to hate me. It's just because what happened last cycle, right? It's the only reason I'm presenting it. Again, I'm not against you. I'm just trying to help. Last cycle, what happened was dominance topped, right? Dominance topped. But then while Bitcoin dominance went down, it went down because Bitcoin was dropping quicker than the altcoin market. Okay. So there does exist a scenario where Bitcoin dominance tops and then starts to go down, and everyone thinks that means alt season now, but there still could be a window where that's not true, right? There could be like a couple month window where that's not actually true, right? Where Bitcoin USD starts to drop and it just drops quicker than the altcoin market. But you should know in 2016, when Bitcoin dominance topped, that was the start of alt season. So I look at this stuff a lot and I try to figure out what's the most likely outcome. Like, I don't want to, I certainly don't want to miss the train with Bitcoin. But the issue for the altcoin market is that if Bitcoin breaks out alts should enter into their final Bitcoin capitulation for the cycle, right? If Bitcoin breaks out, because that's what happened last year when Bitcoin broke out. Alts capitulate against Bitcoin. If Bitcoin is rejected again, then dominance would still likely go up, because every single time that Bitcoin was rejected up here, every single time, it corresponded to Bitcoin dominance getting a surge up, right? Every single time, right? It surged up into the rejections. And even after it, right? You see that? How it just surges up even when Bitcoin USD gets rejected. So the point is to say, yet again, whether there is a breakout or a rejection, Bitcoin dominance should surge above 60%, right? It should at least hit 60, which we're practically there, you know. But I know that if it doesn't actually hit 60 and if it tops here, I'll never hear the end of it, right? I'll never hear the end of it. So I'll try to keep ringing the 60% horn until we actually see it. But those are the two scenarios that I think it makes sense to be prepared for, right? Option one is a repeat of 2019 where dominance tops, it starts to go down, but then altcoins go down commensurate with Bitcoin until Bitcoin finds a floor that it can actually bounce off of. Last cycle, that was the 100-week moving average. Yes, we got a pandemic-induced recession, but I have to believe that had that recession not been the recession risk had it not been brought forward by the pandemic, Bitcoin could have rallied for who knows how long before it would have fallen off the cliff due to a rising unemployment rate, right? Who knows how long it would have gone up. So that's where I am right now, guys. You know, you have the 2019 view, you have the 2016 view. I sure as hell don't know what is the most likely outcome for Bitcoin USD, but I do think that the altcoin market is essentially going into the final capitulation against Bitcoin, right? I think I think what we are in right now are the final days of the Bitcoin dominance rally. If it took you this long to get on board with it, you know, it's your tuition for the cycle. Just take it. You learned your lesson. You'll know next cycle not to fade dominance for those 3 years, right? And just take it as tuition, right? There's nothing you're going to gain by beating yourself up at this point. You know, like if you hung on to like a basket of 10 altcoins and one of them's up against Bitcoin, the other 9 are down, and you feel bad about that, so what, right? I mean, I've been there too. I've been in the exact same place as you, and it sucked. And I learned my lesson, and I was like, never again am I going to buy altcoins in a Bitcoin dominance rally. I'll just stick with I'll stick with the king, and I'll ride that as long as I can. Um, so again, don't feel bad about it. It's tuition. We all pay the tuition at some point. Now dominance is nearing 60%. I think it's entering into the final stages. I do think it will go down next year. I think that if dominance tops out in, say, October or November, there still is a risk for all USD pairs between now and the end of the year. Okay. If Bitcoin dominance can rally throughout the rest of the year, then I would still guess that Bitcoin dominance would go down in 2025. Basically, I think that no matter what, right, whether dominance tops now or in 2 months, I do think dominance will go down in 2025. The question is, does it do something like this where it, kind of does that and then sort of slowly goes down, or does it just go up into the end of the year and then drop like a rock in 2025? Like, I don't know which of these is the most likely outcome. And the funny thing is, one of them is more similar to what happened in 2016. The other is what happened in 2019. And you have to agree there's elements of both, right? I mean, like the cyclical view favors 2016, the monetary policy view favors 2019. And I feel like I have to tiptoe around both ideas because on one hand, we have the bulls that want to just hear it's going to go up. On the other hand, we have the bears that just want to hear that it's going to go down. And I'm trying to be a politician over here, trying not to piss too many people off at the same time and trying to show you guys, like there's actually validity to both outcomes if you don't have a bias, right? If you truly don't have a bias, right, then there's validity to both outcomes, the monetary policy view or the cyclical view. If you have a bias, you are going to ignore the other view, right? If you have absolutely no Bitcoin right now, There is not a bone in you that wants to see a breakout. If you are leveraged to your ears right now, you don't want to hear me talking about BS monetary policy, right? So if you have a bias, you will hear what you want to hear. You will see what you want to see. If you don't have a bias, you will find validity to both outcomes. And that's where I am right now. And that's why I have just remained Bitcoin heavy until 60% dominance. What I am looking for to make sort of a decision on the rest of Q4 is, can Bitcoin get above 70K and hold it? I don't care if it goes to 69K. I don't care if it wicks above 70K. Can it get above 70K or not? If it can get above 70K and start trending up, then I think the cyclical view is favored. If this is just the same thing again for the fourth time, and we start to see a rejection this week, then the monetary policy view is favored. Like, if you see what happened like a few months ago, you had a big candle up, a consolidation week, and then the next week a big move down. But during that week, the last week of July, Bitcoin wicked to a slightly higher level than the last 2 weeks, right? So if that happens, if the same thing happens here again where it wicks up and then just gets rejected and comes back down, and let's say it goes back down to 64K or 63K, I would then start to favor the monetary policy view over the cyclical view. But as long as this uptrend remains intact, and as long as there's not a clear rejection, the cyclical view has to be on your radar until proven otherwise. This is not one of those things necessarily that you have to predict. It is what it is until proven otherwise. That's what it is, right? I mean, again, this is why I say, like, try not to have a bias. Just say, if it breaks out, it favors the cyclical view. If it's rejected, like what happened in October of 2019, or even, after the rate cuts. See, like, this was October of 2019. Bitcoin got rejected right there. So, Bitcoin rallied up in October and then slowly bled back down. So just be open-minded to either view, and once it's clear which one is playing out, then I think you defer to that one. So, um, I don't know how much longer I'm going to go on here. I just wanted to sort of outline those thoughts. Bitcoin dominance still hasn't really moved. It's still at 59.8%, which is typical, right? I mean, it kind of, by the time I go live, it normally stalls out because it takes a pretty aggressive move for me to even want to go live in the first place. And a lot of times you can see it just sort of pull back. But I do think that it will likely go to 60% in the not so distant future. By the way, there's another chart that I think you could look at, and that is dominance excluding stables. I've talked about this one a little bit on the channel. Talked about it on ITC Premium a lot, but I've been following this for a while. Basically, this long-term wedge that really began back in 2021. It tagged this wedge, in June of 2021, and then in June of 2022. And you can see all these higher lows, right? Let me switch over to the weekly time frame, because a lot of those are just like daily wicks below it, right? But if you look at the weekly time frame, you can see that it looks like it's heading towards this trend line. This trend line right now is right around 65.7%. This is excluding stables. So if I say dominance at 65%, if you see me say dominance is 65% on Twitter, there's a good chance in the short term I'm just talking about dominance excluding stablecoins, because excluding stablecoins, the Bitcoin dominance is already well above 60%, right? It's at 64%, 64.3. And I'm just saying that if it tags this trend line one final time, then it could get it to that final milestone, right? That final milestone. So I'm thinking something like this, where it goes up, tags it, maybe it even overshoots it a little bit, but then kind of consolidates and then starts to go back down in 2025. That is what my base case is right now. Okay. See the surge by dominance, tag the trend line, then finally cool off. One really interesting thing about dominance is people have been telling me for 3 years why I was wrong because of the RSI. But look at the RSI on the monthly time frame for Bitcoin dominance. It's at 68, almost 69. What if, and this is one of those things where, like, you know, maybe it's because it's so, like, maybe the most obvious outcome is what happens, right? What if you look on the monthly, dominance monthly RSI bottomed right around 30 at the oversold territory? What if it tops at a monthly RSI around 70, right? So right now it's at 68.5. So just give it another point or so, and then it's at 70%, or sorry, then it's at 70, a monthly RSI of 70, which then puts Bitcoin dominance at 60%, right? But isn't that fascinating how, you know, everyone's been, so many people have, said, well, look at this trend line. There's no way dominance is going to break. What if it just does, goes from oversold to overbought on the RSI? Again, the RSI is not something you should use to make trading decisions. I've seen so many people fail with trading by using the RSI, because the thing is that it can stay overbought for way longer than people think, and it can stay oversold for longer than people think. If you look at the weekly RSI on Bitcoin dominance, look at this, right? It's going back up to where it was previously, you know? And you can see that right here, that's probably the level to break, um, for alts to really move against Bitcoin. And, basically getting below a weekly RSI of 50, right? And I mean, it would drop down there if it just dropped back to the bull market support band or slightly below it, right? Kind of like it did in January 2024. You see that? You see where it dropped below it, and the weekly RSI went down there. So if in January 2025 you have Bitcoin dominance dropping to the bull market support band, it would probably correspond to that hitting the RSI hitting the trend line. And then maybe later on in 2025, the weekly RSI comes back down here, right? And that's where you finally see altcoins start to outperform Bitcoin. But it's been a long journey, guys. Bitcoin dominance, the 60% journey, it's almost here. I really hope we catch it on a live stream, but I also don't want to talk for too much longer because I don't really know what else to say. I've outlined the two most likely scenarios for Bitcoin USD. And by the way, I mean, the second scenario, just so there's no ambiguity. I mean, there are other risks associated with the market, right? Yes, there could be a crazy recession, all that stuff, but the two most likely outcomes that I see for Bitcoin are either it breaks out now, or there's one more sell off and then it breaks out, right? So, that I don't really think it's, those are the two most likely ones, right? Is there a scenario where it falls down, bounces, and just keeps on putting in lower lows and lower highs? There is. But in terms of the cyclical nature of Bitcoin, when it normally tops, normally it's Q4 of the post halving year, and I think it makes sense to assume that until proven otherwise, right? If there's, if it can't rally off the 100-week moving average, if it does go down there, then that would be sort of a telling sign that that's it. But those would be the two most likely outcomes, right? Either breakthrough now or go down here, causing QE to return and more interest rate cuts, and then go up and break out. Those are the two most likely outcomes. I'll stay Bitcoin heavy until 60% dominance. At 60%, what I will do is see if it can break through 70K, right? If it can break through 70K, then there's nothing necessarily wrong with holding it through favorable seasonality in Q4 of having years. But if it cannot durably break through 70K and then it starts falling in early November, because of some bad labor market report or something like that, then I think the most likely outcome is just to come back down here, right? That's what I would guess. But yeah, so right now dominance is at 59.83. The highest it has gone, I think, is 59.87. It's real. I mean, it's almost there, right? It really is almost there. We go to the minute chart so we can actually see. Yeah. So the highest it's gone is 59.87. We'll see. We'll see if it can make it to that 60% milestone. Regardless of what happens, I think that when dominance hits 60%, there's going to be a huge move in the market. A huge move, either up or down. Volatility should pick up a lot, because what I think is going to happen at 60% dominance is it's going to wake some people up in the altcoin market, right? And I do think that market conditions will start to change. They might not change immediately, but I do think they're going to start to change. So I would say whenever Bitcoin dominance breaks above 60%, there should be a massive move in the market in one direction or the other. If we're above 70K and holding that, it'll more likely be up. If we're rejected at 70K and can't get above it, more likely to be down. But that's where I am. Any questions? Someone says alts are already beginning to capitulate. Yeah, I mean, if you look at if you look at total 3 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin, let's go to the weekly time frame here. They're at 0.36. They actually just put on a new low last week. Others Bitcoin, yeah, I think it's at 0.15, 0.16, something like that. Yeah, it's at 0.15 right now. So this is a new low, right? I mean, others Bitcoin, I guess it's basically tied with the low from last week at this point, right? But it's basically, others Bitcoin has been putting in a new low between the last week or so. Um, what other questions do we have? Yeah, guys, I know I see people talking about ETH, but my sort of thought process on ETH until the 50-day SMA is taken out, just be open-minded to lower levels, right? But once that's taken out, then that could be it. In 2016 and 2019, once there were daily closes above this moving average, the low was in, right? I don't know exactly when that's going to be, but if you're looking for some type of, again, there's no such thing as a sure thing, right? But if you want some more confirmation, right, that is something I would watch, the 50-day SMA. Because again, in 2016 and 2019, once ETH Bitcoin moved above it, the low is in for ETH Bitcoin. A lot of these other alts are just getting hammered, right? Dot Bitcoin is putting in new lows again. Link Bitcoin, it looks like it's at this trend line again, but it's a new low. Litecoin Bitcoin getting rejected. Sol Bitcoin has been honestly it's been doing better than a lot of the other alts. The thing that I would watch in the short term is, does it get rejected by sort of that trend line there, or does it break through, right? Because it seems like it's at a sort of at a really important crossroads there on its Bitcoin pair. ADA Bitcoin, it's at 487 sats. So you guys 3 years ago was going to go to 400 sats. Uni Bitcoin still not really doing anything great. BNB Bitcoin. One of the reasons why dominance has gone up so much is because BNB has been selling off to Bitcoin, right? And that's a much higher market cap alt than most of the alts. AVAX Bitcoin selling off again. I saw, if you guys have followed Bitcoin dominance videos, we talked about AVAX Bitcoin basically falling to this low by the end of the year, around 3,000 sats. Aave Bitcoin actually had a pretty decent move. So I was sort of thinking maybe it'll do something like this, right? Either down and then up, or maybe it holds at the bull market support band, which is where it's sort of falling into now. But um, something to keep an eye on. The dollar is at 104.3. If you actually look at alt Bitcoin pairs, as I mentioned before, they generally track net liquidity, right? And net liquidity just continues to drop. If you overlay net liquidity with alt Bitcoin pairs, you can see pretty clearly that they tend to track each other. So as the dollar goes up, alt Bitcoin pairs go down. I wouldn't be that surprised. I said this a week ago or sometime last week. It might not have been quite a week ago, but I said this last week that I wouldn't be that surprised if the dollar stalls out for at least a week or two before continuing higher. And so far, that's actually panned out. It's not one of those things I have a super strong conviction in, but basically, when initial claims came in really low and then the dollar sold off, I was like, well, maybe it needs to consolidate for a week or two before continuing higher. So don't be surprised if the dollar does consolidate for a little bit longer. It could even drop to the back to the bull market support band potentially, right? It could do this and then go up. Or maybe it'll just sort of consolidate here and then continue higher. But I do think the dollar will continue to go up for at least a few more weeks, potentially topping by the end of this year or early next year. Well, guys, it doesn't look like we're going to see 60% on the live stream, unfortunately, because Bitcoin dominance is still at 59.8. It doesn't really seem like it's moving at the current time. more than likely it'll start moving again whenever I end the stream. But I was sort of hoping to maybe catch it here, but it doesn't look like I'm going to be able to. If I go to the shorter term time frame, I can look at the trend. Yeah, I mean even basically since for the last half hour or so, it's just been slowly going back down. So perhaps we'll not catch it today, but it is a milestone that I do think will be achieved before not too long. All right, guys. Anything else? Someone says it seems pretty hardcore for Bitcoin to return to 42K. Yeah, I know. It's not. I think it's something that should be in the back of your mind as a possibility, but not something that you're like, oh, that has to happen, right? Because the reality is the markets generally go up, not down. And I have had strong convictions before about certain downturns, and I've been wrong. Sometimes I've been right. I would say be optimistic, hope that 70K is taken out. But if it's not, right, if 70K is not durably taken out, then that would be your next stop, more than likely. Um, someone say faint at 42. Do you think a surprise election result would potentially correspond to a wider market downturn? I don't really think that the election result will have a huge impact on Bitcoin. I know there's going to be a lot of people that are going to not like that view, but that's what I think. Um, What alt am I looking for after 6% dominance? First of all, I think it makes sense to just look at ones that are doing well against Bitcoin. Alts that are doing well against Bitcoin are more likely to continue to do well than alts that are not. So that's where I would start. Any view on the RSI? I think it's got to, RSI is not something you should put a lot of faith in, honestly. What about the social metrics? We can go take a look at the social metrics. Um, let's go look at YouTube views. So these are YouTube views to different crypto YouTube channels. Still pretty low, right? If we go look at the social risk, it's at 0.084. This is the thing that I think this is why dominance has continued to go up, because social risk keeps on putting in lower highs, right? It hasn't actually started to put in higher highs yet. And last cycle, it really started to put in higher highs after QE resumed, right? Once QE started, Bitcoin or social risk started going back up, right? We haven't seen that yet, right? So far, it just keeps on being lower highs. So that's why I think, you have to look at the effect of rate cuts, the effect of QE, etc. Oh, there does exist a scenario, by the way, where the cyclical view and the monetary policy view could both be correct. I meant to talk about that. It doesn't seem like the most likely outcome, but I will present it nevertheless. Last cycle, Bitcoin USD was able to take out the lower high structure after QE began. Uh, there is a chance that if QE begins next week, if the Fed just does a complete reversal, then potentially both could still be true, right? You would finally have the breakout as QE begins. But if QE does not begin, then you would just get you would argue that the monetary policy view would favor a rejection. I think the hard part with QE is that in order to get QE, you kind of need a downturn in the market, right? So as long as you don't get that, it makes sense to just be heavy Bitcoin over heavy alts, right? It's the drop in the market that causes QE to begin in the first place, right? So I think that's sort of the biggest argument there. How do we know when QE has begun? Well, I mean, just listen to the FOMC stuff, right? I mean, if you go look at total assets held by the Federal Reserve, I mean, Powell will tell you next week. I mean, at the last FOMC, they said that they're just going to continue reducing the size of their balance sheet. Let me see if I can pull it up for you guys so you can know what I'm talking about. Let's find the last meeting. So in September. All right. So here's the press release from September 18th. Um, Here it is. Look, the committee will continue reducing its holdings of Treasury securities and agency debt and agency mortgage-backed securities. So next week at the November meeting, if you see this, look for this, right? If you're in ComSci, just run a diff statement on this PDF and the new one that comes out, and see if there's any difference between that statement and the statement in the next press release. If they say they will just continue reducing the holdings of its treasury securities, Bitcoin dominance should keep going up, right? If they say the committee will stop reducing it or begin increasing, then you have to start to take the other side of the narrative, right? You got to start thinking, all right, they're telling us that QE is going to start, and hell, last cycle when it started, that's when Bitcoin dominance topped, right? So that's what you look for, right? And the next FOMC is what, November 7th? Yeah, it's November 7th, right? So November 7th, we'll know. And last meeting, by the way, I was a little surprised. I thought they might say something about the balance sheet, to be dovish about it. But Powell was actually pretty hawkish when it came to the balance sheet. I mean, he basically just said, "No, we're going to keep reducing the size of the balance sheet, and I don't care." And that's basically what he said. So we'll see what he says this time, if he's changed his mind at all. I think a lot of it's going to depend on what happens. By the way, if you're curious about whether the 2016 view or 2019 view plays out for Bitcoin here, I think what it actually depends on is the labor market release that's about to come out, because what corresponded to these lower highs by Bitcoin. It corresponded to the unemployment rate surging, right? And then you can see as the unemployment rate has come down, Bitcoin has gone back up to the structure, right? So if the unemployment rate keeps going down, that would be more favorable. It might not be more favorable for yields, but it'd be more favorable for the economy if the unemployment rate keeps going down. If the unemployment rate goes up, then that means the Fed needs to, really needs to get into more rate cuts and potentially starting QE, which would help, which was their main, that's their two main tools that they have. And that's if the unemployment rate does go up, then it's more likely than not that they're going to become the Fed will become more dovish, and therefore the dovishness would eventually lead to Bitcoin dominance topping. Can I see Bitcoin and ETH risk metrics? Sure, I'll pull it up. So for Bitcoin, it's currently 0.534. So here it is in the historical. Like if you just look at it like this is what it looks like. So this is what happened in 2019, right? Like it came up and then it came back down, and then it ended up bottoming in the 0.3 to 0.4 risk band, right? That's where it bottomed at the end of 2019. Now, let's assume there's no pandemic-induced crash. That could have been it. That was the soft landing, right? The 0.3 to 0.4 risk band. Now, look at Ethereum. Look at 2016 and 2019. Where did it bottom in 2016 and 2019? Where did it bottom? In Q4, it bottomed between 0.3 to 0.4 risk, right? Right here in 2016, 2019. That's why I keep thinking ETH is going to go to the 0.3 to 0.4 risk band, right? That's my base case. Honestly, I'm ready to get my face ripped off on that prediction. Bring it on. I think it does make sense to start hedging that view, because ETH Bitcoin is already at 0.036. It's already where I thought it was going to go. I made the conversion at 0.075. I can double my ETH now just by sitting in Bitcoin for 3 years, right? This is one simple trick to double your ETH. Sit in Bitcoin during QT and high interest rates, and then you double your ETH. So I'm ready to get my face ripped off on this if I'm wrong. But that's what happened, right? In 2016 and 2019, when ETH Bitcoin broke down, ETH USD went down in Q4, right? And look at this. I mean, it's doing the same thing right here. The risk levels at the same thing in October of 2024 and October of 2019. Very similar here as well, October 2016. October 2016, ETH risk, the same as it is today, and the same as October of 2019, right? And then what happened is once November and December arrived, ETH USD had one final sell-off, and then it started going up. One final sell-off. So my base case for Ethereum, and I know this is one of those things where you guys are gonna destroy me if I am wrong. And I'll deserve it, honestly. Uh, but my base case is that ETH goes home before it goes to new all-time highs. That's my base case because that's what happened here, right? Into Q4 of 2016 and then up. Q4 of 2019, just exclude the pandemic, and then up. That's the base case for me, right? Going down into Q4 of 2024 and then up the following year. You might say, well, does that mean Bitcoin has to go down too? Not necessarily, right? In Q4 of 2016, Bitcoin went up even though ETH went down. So it is possible that Bitcoin could go up even if ETH goes down. There is a possibility that it happens, but we'll see, right? We'll see if that happens. Bitcoin went up here in Q4 2016, ETH went down. Um, it doesn't seem like, it might not seem like the most likely outcome, but there's a possibility that it actually does happen. So I think the thing is I'm either right about ETH going home, or if Bitcoin does break out, then there's a higher chance that ETH won't go home, right? And it'll just lift it up with it. So I think that's the risk that you take if you're getting all in on ETH right now. There is a risk that just like last cycle, ETH USD sells off in November and December of the year where ETH Bitcoin breaks down, right? But as I said, with ETH Bitcoin at 0.036, I do think I think it does make sense to start thinking about when is this going to start turning around. My guess is it bottoms somewhere in here, and then starts going up in 2025. But I don't know exactly where, right? And a lot of people keep asking me, but I don't know. I will just say, whenever it takes out the 50-day SMA, there's at least a 50% chance that the low is in. Because in 2016 and 2019, the low was in when it took out the 50-day SMA after durably breaking down. Do you look at others' dominance? Yeah, I look at it some. But it looks like I think it broke down yesterday, didn't it? Unless I'm wrong. Yeah, I mean, it looks like it broke down. Um, I think, I had a lot of people send me this chart because I think I know what trend line you're talking about. I had a lot of people sending me this stuff. And I do think it's relevant to look at this because yes, there is a chance that it sort of bottoms out around here. But we'll see, right? A lot of times these trend lines like this don't actually hold over a longer period of time, right? They hold for a while and then they eventually break down. We'll see. Again, when it comes to something like others Bitcoin, or sorry, others dominance, right? When it comes to something like others dominance, because Bitcoin dominance is so close to 60%, like if dominance hits 60%, I honestly don't even have a strong bias on this one anymore, right? I've been bearish on it because dominance wasn't at 60. But if Bitcoin dominance is at 60%, then I'm more neutral on it, right? Like I'm more neutral on it. Again, I'm not here to like, just press the view forever and ever and ever, right? I do think dominance at 60% and that might maybe that's it, right? Maybe it doesn't need to go any lower. Um but we'll see. We'll see. I mean, we're still not there yet. We are pretty close, but we're not there yet. All right, looks like we're getting spammed now by the some bots. So we'll go ahead and wrap it up, guys. Um, and I do thank you guys for tuning in. We will see if Bitcoin dominance can hit that 60% milestone. Uh, Honestly, I mean, I do think it's close enough, if I'm being completely honest. But while I do think it's close enough, I really do feel strongly that we will see 60% at some point this cycle. And I think it should happen relatively soon. But we'll see. We'll see if we can make it there. Thank you guys for tuning in. Subscribe, give the video a thumbs up. Again, check out Into the Cryptoverse Premium if you want to get access to a lot of those charts and weekly video. We do 3 weekly videos as well. But um, I think we will wrap it up there. All right. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.